I've been told that we are cleared. How many people do we have here now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're missing somebody. We're missing Andrew. Okay, well, we got 8. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, July 21st, 2020, Montgomery County Council meeting. We're going to begin our day asking Councilmember Jawando to please give a tribute to the, as the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi has called him, the conscience of the Congress, Congressman John Lewis. Councilmember Jawando, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to everybody, all my colleagues and those watching at home. Today we celebrate and honor the life and legacy of Congressman John Lewis. Congressman Lewis was an inspiration to so many people, including myself growing up. A man whose integrity and values guided every step he took in the pursuit of justice. He was strong, he was compassionate, and he spoke with conviction and certainty when he saw something that wasn't right. Indeed, he would get in a lot of good trouble, as he called it, standing up for what he knew was wrong. His resilience in the face of adversity is what built his legacy as a student organizer, a congressman, and an American hero. As a result of his work, he became a moral leader and, as was mentioned, the conscience of the United States Congress, earning respect from colleagues across the aisle and across the world. Congressman Lewis, the son of sharecroppers, was born on February 21st, 1940, outside of Troy, Alabama. He dedicated his life to studying methods for nonviolent protest, which began his involvement in the sit-ins in restaurants and public places in the movements in the South. In 1961, he became one of the 13 freedom riders that openly challenged segregation in interstate southern bus terminals. Over time, he began to see that his changes and his efforts were working, and he decided to continue that journey in politics and in policy. During the height of the Civil Rights Movement from 1963 to 1966, Congressman Lewis was named chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, which helped organize student activism in the movement in sit-ins across the country and across the South. He was the youngest speaker at the 1963 March on Washington, number 6 in the line, alongside Dr. King and so many others. Indeed, it's a great loss today that he was the last remaining living speaker from that program, who's no longer with us. So an end of an era, and the responsibility to recommit, fight jobs, and for freedom that march was all about. In his autobiography, he wrote, "Freedom is not a state, it's an act. It is not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can finally sit down and rest. Freedom is the continuous action we must all take, and each generation must do its part to create an even more fair, more just society." What a charge to all of us today, in the midst of multiple pandemics, that we would take up his mantle and work each day to make our society more fair and more just. On a personal note, I want to thank Congressman Lewis for his mentorship and support. He didn't have to do it. He did it for so many. Given his stature, he reached back. Countless stories I know of people on the Hill and others that he had mentored, taken time to meet with and support and smile and be patient and be kind, no matter who you were. And that's another lesson I take from him today. We mourn your loss, but remember your legacy, and thank you for your service. And we commit to continuing to get into good trouble. Rest in peace, Congressman John Lewis.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. That was truly a wonderful tribute. And with that, if everyone can please join me in a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements, changes to the agenda, or petitions?
Yes, good morning, everyone. On the addendum on 2S on the consent calendar, we've added an introduction, resolution in support of mailing ballots to voters for the 2020 general election. Lead sponsor, County Council. Public hearing action is scheduled for July 28th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Added 2T, introduction, special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget, Department of Health and Human Services, Behavioral Health and Crisis Prevention and Intervention Services, $395,000 for Montgomery County Hotline, source of funds, federal grant and general fund reserves, and amendment to FY21 operating budget resolution 19-472, section G, FY21 designation of entities for non-competitive contract award status, Every Mind. Lead sponsor is the County Council. The Health and Human Services Committee work session is tentatively scheduled for July 23rd, 2020. Public hearing action is scheduled for July 28th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Added to U, introduction, resolution in support of Indigenous Peoples Day. Lead sponsor, County Council. Public hearing action is scheduled for July 28th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Added V, introduction, special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget, COVID-19 Human Services and Community Assistance, non-departmental account, $20 million for COVID-19 response, rental assistance and eviction and homelessness prevention. Source of funds, federal grant funds. Public hearing action is scheduled for July 28, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Added to W, introduction, special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget for COVID-19 Human Services and Community Assistance, NDA, $7,545,590 por nuestra salud y bienestar, for our health and well-being. Source of funds, federal grant, $6,593,042, and general fund reserves, $952,548. Lead sponsor is the County Council. Public hearing action is scheduled for July 28, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Also, on the legislative session, day 22 at 2 p.m., 12D, introduction of bills, correction, expedited bill 3420, police disciplinary procedures, police labor relations, duty to bargain amendments. Lead sponsors, council members Reamer and Rice. Added co-sponsor, council member Giwando. Public hearing is scheduled for September 15th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Also, under general business, there's one receipt of a petition from residents of Montgomery County supporting zoning text amendment 20-01, solar collection system, AR zone standards. That is all, Council President.
Thank you very much. We have received the minutes. The minutes have been distributed for April 30th, 2020, and unless there are any corrections, they will be approved as received. And I see nobody jumping up and down. Okay, approved as received. The next item is the consent calendar. Is there a motion? It has been moved by Councilmember Friedson, seconded by Councilmember Rice, to approve our consent calendar. As is no surprise, if you look at the list on the consent calendar, we have a few people that would like to say something about it. So the first person on the list is Vice President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everybody. As Councilmember Rice has said, I think it's a smorgasbord of goodness again, or cornucopia, something like that. So I want to just comment on 3 or 4 of these items, and I know my colleagues will comment on many of them as well. The first is the item H, the special appropriation for mobile crisis response. I really want to thank all my colleagues and the council staff for their work and advice and insight on this special appropriation, particularly the members of the Public Safety and the HHS Committee for recommending it and working on it, and the county executive and his team, particularly Dr. Crowell, and on our team, Linda McMillan, who put an awful lot of time in research and writing to get us to this point. And I want to call out also the advocates and stakeholders that spoke up for us to take this approach, particularly the Silver Spring Justice Coalition and other groups. All the support and insight was critical to getting us to this point. This is really a big deal. If you weren't able to attend the joint hearing on this appropriation, I can tell you we don't often hear county leaders like our police chief and our HHS director calling new programs a game changer or vitally needed. But that's exactly what we heard in this joint hearing, and that's really, I think, a tribute to the strength of this approach. And I'm really glad we're on this journey. This is, of course, just the first milestone that appropriates the money and allows us to begin the hiring process. We have a long way to go. I'm excited that we're going to follow the data. I'm grateful to Councilmember Navarro and OLO for the work they're doing to help guide us in this area, and that we're going to be looking at best practices from all over the country because there's a lot of good work being done in this space. So today is just the first step, first big milestone, but it reflects a lot of work by a lot of people that I want to thank, particularly all my colleagues. And I'm really looking forward to working with you on all the next steps. The second item is the resolution in support of mailing ballots. COVID-19, of course, has changed everything, including the primary. And I'm glad that you all signed on to a letter I drafted urging the State Board of Elections to implement a mail-in primary election to immediately correct the problems leading to it. The primary election was not ideal. There were many concerns that voters faced, but the mail-in election at least protected public safety and allowed many voters to exercise their rights. I'm glad to be supporting this resolution to call on the governor to immediately protect public safety and encourage participation by reversing this unwise, costly decision to conduct the general election with only in-person and absentee voting without mandating that ballots automatically be mailed to voters. Given the pandemic, the Maryland Association of Election Officials, which represents the local officials in election boards from all 24 jurisdictions, has recommended the hybrid vote-by-mail election, which includes ballots being automatically mailed to voters. And those recommendations make much more sense. It's rare to have a statewide consensus on this, and I hope the governor will change his position on this. It's true there were some problems in the primary election. Some ballots arrived late. That wasn't the fault of the voters. Those go back to the Board of Elections and the contractor. Those can be avoided with this election, but there is no reason at all to jeopardize voter turnout by not mailing ballots directly to all the voters. And then third, I want to thank the county executive and my colleagues for supporting item V, the rental assistance and eviction homelessness prevention special appropriation. We've done a lot for tenants, but we're facing a tsunami of evictions when the eviction moratorium ends. And a DHCA survey says 15% of county renters were delinquent on part of all their rent in June, compared to 5% of renters at the beginning of this in March. This is just a start. We need to go farther than that. We really need our state and federal partners to step up. No local government can get through a crisis like this alone. I'm looking forward to more conversations with you on this topic. And finally, I just want to quickly thank and congratulate all the members of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Advisory Committee nominees. This is a very distinguished group that reflects really well on the county. I've had the opportunity to work with many of them in the past. I look forward to working with the whole committee in the future. And I want to give a special congratulations to our own clerk, Selena Singleton, who I know will bring a lot of experience and professionalism and great insight to this very important work. So thanks again to Councilmember Navarro for her leadership getting this stood up. It's a moment of great pride, I think, for the county moving forward, and I'm really looking forward to working with all the nominees. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you so much. I really worry every time I have to speak because I know my internet connection always acts out, but here we go. Thank you so much for all the work, colleagues. This consent calendar is just extraordinary. It's amazing. And so I support everything that's in it. I would just speak to a few items. Number one, I want to thank you for the support of the resolution to establish Indigenous Peoples Day. This is really, I think, an important step forward. We have worked very hard to address many issues, especially old symbols of bigotry. And I am really excited that all of this is being addressed and being replaced as issues of racial equity and social justice take center stage even during a global pandemic. I think it's really important that we make this particular change. And of course, the resolution calls on the General Assembly to use its powers granted at the Maryland Constitution to recognize Indigenous Peoples Days as a state holiday, and for Montgomery County Public Schools to undergo a review of its curriculum to better incorporate the histories, narratives, and cultures of our country's native people. This is not about erasing history, but instead elevating traditionally silenced voices as part of our historical narrative. And I may add that this is really important, I think, for our county and our state. And it also, it's super important for the very large Caribbean and Latin American community in our county, because the history regarding Columbus Day really runs through many of those countries, and it has left quite a bit of a, I would say, unfortunate and terrible legacy. And so I'm really excited that everybody has decided to endorse this, and that we're introducing this as a council resolution. Of course, the next item I'd like to speak of is item W, and this is the special appropriation to establish an initiative called Por Nuestra Salud y Bienestar. You can call it Salud Initiative for short if you want, but the reality is that, to me, this is one of the very first major, I think, initiatives that we are putting forth under the umbrella or framework of our racial equity and social justice law. We said that we would look at data and we would act accordingly. And I want to first recognize that a lot of effort has been put through this pandemic to address so many different issues, especially issues that affect our Black and Latino community. And this particular initiative, what it does is that it takes things to a next level to make sure that we're able to deliver services in a targeted way, but also in a culturally proficient and linguistically proficient manner. Councilmember Albornoz has been amazing as chair of the HHS committee, really juggling so many things at once. And I really want to thank him for immediately stepping up and us just joining forces with our staff, who are amazing, and as well as the leadership of the Latino Health Initiative and many other organizations. The HHS department, as well as our wonderful Linda McMillan, everybody worked in record time to get this going. But I think it speaks to the fact that we have already a lot of assets in our community. And so it was just a matter of coming together, listening to best practices, and putting this template together as soon as possible. Now, why is this important? It's very important because we're working really hard to ensure that we can address the ravages of this pandemic. If we allow one particular group in our community, one particular segment of our community to continue to be disproportionately affected, it undermines our effort. And so this is why, in my opinion, this particular template is so critical. I will also add that, I've had conversations with Councilmember Rice, who is also a member of the HHS committee, to begin, he has, already started to talk about replicating something similar in our African American community, because although the cases in the Latino community are disproportionately high, the reality is in our Black community, the death rate continues to be disproportionately high. So we have a lot of work to do. And this particular, I think, initiative with your support will get us to, I hope, a place where we can begin to see that trend going down versus the way it's been going for this particular community. So again, I want to thank you so much. And as you can see in the resolution, it includes many of the things that we have all been discussing and proposing throughout this pandemic. It just puts it all together in a very targeted way. And I think that that's what's so important. So you will hear more, of course, but again, thank you so much to the Latino Health Initiative, to all these partners, Councilmember Albornoz staff, my staff, Berta Flores, who is just a rock star, and Linda McMillan for putting this together in record time. Of course, the Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee, I'm so excited that this is happening. This is really wonderful. I looked at the names and the resumes, and these are amazing people. So this is another very important step forward. Support everything else regarding the mailing ballots, the DD supplement, of course, the money for census that is so, so critical. I think that's really important. And thank you to the Office of Legislative Oversight, we have been leaning on heavily and depending on for information. Everything is moving so fast, and so I really appreciate how quickly they have put forth those papers on the post-COVID-19 recovery in a lot of different policy areas, as well as looking at the 911 data with regards to mental health issues. Anyway, this is, yes, another chock-full cornucopia, however you want to call it, un calendario lleno de cosas buenas, but I really appreciate everybody's amazing work in response to all of this. This has been a team effort, and for that I cannot say how proud I am to serve with all of you during this particular time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're big watchers of Sesame Street in my house, and the letter of the day is all of the above. There's a lot going on today. I want to start with item number W and just express my deep appreciation for the partnership with Councilmember Navarro. As I've said many times before in this dais, we've worked collaboratively together for almost 16 years now on a variety of issues, and I want to express publicly my appreciation of our friendship and of your leadership. And your leadership is shown throughout this consent calendar in so many different ways, Councilmember Navarro. As she stated so eloquently, we do have an emergency before us. As we learned recently, the percentage of positive test rates is so ridiculously disproportionately higher in the Latino community that it demands that we stand up a strategy to address that as soon as humanly possible. And I do give credit to the administration for taking a number of steps to overall address the curve of COVID in our communities. But as she also stated, and as we all know, this has continued to disproportionately impact our Black and brown neighborhoods and communities, with the top 10 zip codes corresponding to some of the most diverse zip codes in our county, and the top 4 being especially among the most diverse. And so this initiative will absolutely serve as a template that all of our communities can follow to address the unique needs of our respective communities and the nuances that are required to address those needs. Specifically within the Latino community, because of the assault on this particular presidential administration over the last 3 years on immigration, it has grown a distrust among many members of our community in accessing government services. And among the most asked questions of county residents seeking tests and that are Spanish speaking is whether or not accessing those tests and these government services will affect their status within public charge. And the fact that they're even having to think about that in the middle of a pandemic is absurd. And so we are fortunate that all 3 of our minority health initiatives and program have incredible stakeholders on the ground, made up of organizations who have been doing this work for so many years and have built trust within the community. And the beauty of this initiative is that it's grassroots led. It is very similar to the model that has been established so successfully in Germantown, which was also community led with support from county government. And that's what this model highlights. It's providing the leverage and support of the organizations who are already doing this work on the ground, but giving them the resources and a little bit more of the overall strategic plan that will put them in a better position to keep our communities and all of us safe. And so I look forward to the ongoing discussion and collaboration with the executive branch to stand up this initiative. And this will save lives. It will have a tremendous impact. And this will also serve as a template for other highly hit communities. Next, Mr. Council President, I want to highlight item number J, which is the special appropriation that all of my colleagues have supported to support both our medical clinics and our medical practices and dental practices in Montgomery County. And I do want to highlight one thing and express again my appreciation for the collaboration with the executive branch on this, and acknowledge that they did make the request that for the $2 million of that appropriation, that there be some flexibility for them to seek a third party to administer this particular fund. As I confirmed with our county attorney, Bob Drummer, the language that is already in the resolution already gives the county executive flexibility, if necessary, to seek another body to help facilitate and administer the $2 million component of this particular measure. And so I wanted to acknowledge publicly that that the expectation is that to get the work done, and they're in the best position to know how to do that. So just wanted to mention that. Next, Mr. Council President, is the resolution in support of mailing ballots. Our governor in our state was among the first to take very aggressive measures, call a state of emergency to address the pandemic. And all of those efforts have borne fruit. Our state is faring much better than other jurisdictions across the country. And so why take such drastic potential steps backward by putting forward a plan for a business as usual election? My dad, who is 74 years old, proudly signed up to serve as a election judge. He's bilingual, and he's exactly the kind of person that we all need to recruit to help make sure that we administer safe elections in our county. I don't want to put my dad or any of the volunteers or election judges at risk of having to decide whether or not they want to comply with their very passionate civic duty and also their health. That is a false choice, and it is imperative that the governor reconsider his position on this, acknowledging there absolutely were challenges with the primary, as Councilmember Hucker stated, but let's fix those issues. Let's not go so significantly backwards and risk what will likely be one of the biggest voter turnout elections in modern history and put people at risk. That just is absurd to me. So I very much support that resolution. And then several other items that I just want to highlight is appreciation to Councilmember Hucker and all of my colleagues, and especially the Public Safety Committee and HHS Committee, on the mobile crisis response funds and that model, and hearing more about the Crisis Now model that's being developed in our county. This is one of the areas that gives me a lot of hope that we will be able to holistically address the complex needs of our community moving forward in a way that's authentic, in a way that's real, in a way that really makes an impact. So this is an important measure. I also want to join my colleagues in thanking the appointees of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Advisory Committee, especially Ms. Selena Singleton. It is an outstanding group of men and women who are going to serve us well. And so thank you for that service. And I want to end by focusing on, well, two items. One is the additional support payment for organizations directly serving our disability community, developmental disability community. It's important that we continue to stand up those efforts and acknowledge those organizations and that community that has also been disproportionately impacted. And then finally, item R, which is the special appropriation to help support our census. It's crazy that in the midst of all of this, every 10 years, it just so happens to fall around the same time that we have to administer our census. And although we're faring well as compared to other jurisdictions in the state, we are still behind where we were this same time 10 years ago. And if we don't aggressively go all in on making sure that every last person fills out the census in Montgomery County, we will lose billions of dollars in federal support that will have longstanding impacts on our ability to address social safety net needs and all of those other critical items that we will need to move forward our county. So thank you all very much. It's such an honor to serve with all of you, and look forward to the rest of our discussion today. And I'm going to drink some water now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to all colleagues. And I won't go through each and every item, but there are so many things on the consent agenda that I will agree with everybody. I just wanted to quickly highlight a few. The first is the Salud Initiative. I appreciate the allowance there, Councilmember Navarro, of the abbreviated version, so I can remember that a little bit easier. But really want to commend Councilmembers Navarro and Albertos for their continued work on this issue, which frankly started on day one, the morning after the first cases. They were on top of these issues for challenges facing members of our community. And I think it speaks to the fact that each of us on the county council brings unique background and unique perspectives to this job. And I think together we have really been able to take advantage of the different backgrounds and perspectives to provide the type of COVID relief response that is necessary. And I think this is really maybe the best testament of that, and a really terrific demonstration of leadership. I also think, as we talked about equity, this is the definition of the difference between equality and equity. This is a targeted issue facing a targeted community that requires a targeted response. A one-size-fits-all for the entire county response would not be appropriate here, is not how we should be responding. And when the question comes up of what is the difference, the answer is this. This is the difference, and it's the right thing to do. It's the right approach to take, and I'm very proud to be able to play a very small part to work with colleagues, and particularly the two of you on this really important initiative. Similarly, the rental assistance program, this has been a joint effort between the executive branch and the council and outside organizations, private sector, public sector, advocates, et cetera. I think this is a really good example of collaboration. A lot of us have been working on specific issues related to housing, and this was an area where we all decided to put aside our individual need to get credit and to just get something done. And I just really appreciate everybody, executive branch, county council staff, the advocates, the private sector coming together to come up with what I think is a robust response to a massive challenge, and something that we realize, even though it's probably greater than we've ever done, is nowhere near enough to what the need really is in our community and the challenges facing our residents who don't know what they're going to do about their next rent payment. And that is a huge challenge that we're going to have to continue to keep an eye on. Similarly, appreciate Council Vice President, Hucker, and his leadership on the elections issue. I will just echo the comments made by Councilmember Albertos and Councilmember Hucker on that, and just say that the governor has done a lot of things well during this pandemic, but this was a really poor decision, something that I think has significant consequences. We should be following the guidance of our public health experts and our local elections officials. Elections should be as accessible and as convenient as possible so that our residents can cast ballots. That's what elections are all about, but they have to be as safe as possible as well, so that nobody has to risk their life to exercise their right to cast a ballot. I don't think this strikes the appropriate balance in what the governor has put forward, and pleased that we are stepping up to try to change that, and look forward to continuing that advocacy, which is going to be necessary as we move forward. Commend all of the other items. The mobile crisis one is one in particular that I think is terrific, and it dovetails well. We're approving that today, and we're also introducing another one specifically focused on the mental health challenges in our community that are particularly acute. I am extremely proud to have been working on this issue with Councilmember Jawando and Councilmember Albertos. This is a continuation, really, of work that Councilmember Jawando and I worked on last year, during last year's budget, to extend the crisis hotline into the nighttime hours when young people in particular are most isolated, most alone, have the least amount of access to desperately needed resources. This is a $395,000 appropriation, reflecting the fact that Everymind, which is our frontline for crisis intervention for mental health issues, has been facing 25% increased volume with no additional resources, and that is sustained and is likely to continue to grow. The stress, the pressure, the challenges, the triggers that are happening right now with all of the uncertainty and anxiety in our community is only getting worse, and we need to step up to be able to address it. This is a modest down payment, frankly, to be able to keep up with some of those needs, but it will help, and it will help significantly. And so I look forward to that. It will provide 8 full-time equivalent specialists to staff the hotline along with supervisory, managerial, and administrative support for those positions through December 2020 through COVID. That's a $300,000 appropriation, then an additional $95,000 to extend the hour similarly to what we did last year, which will sustain beyond December 2020. We didn't want to be in a position where we'd have to take back time that the hotline is open. And I'll just close by saying, when we're talking about a crisis hotline, we're talking about things as serious and as life-threatening as suicide ideation. Missing a call or missing a text means life and death. And this is a very small price to pay, and frankly, I think just the beginning of what we're going to need to do as we ramp up these efforts in our mental health challenges to be able to meet the needs, because there should never be a circumstance in Montgomery County where somebody calls for help and there's nobody on the other line to pick up the phone, where somebody texts for help and there's nobody there to respond. We can't allow that to happen. This is a small but very important step in the right direction. Appreciate that it's being introduced by the full county council, and appreciate in particular council members Juando and Albornoz, who we work together as well as with staff to be able to put this forward, and really thank every mind who has stepped up in massive ways during this crisis with a limited budget and a limited amount of staff and a lot of volunteers to be able to step up. And I know this is just the beginning of what we need to do in order to address the acute and massive challenges affecting the mental health of our residents and the wellness of our residents. Thank you for that, Mr. President. Thank you to all colleagues for all of the great work on this agenda.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice.
So thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Vice President, for highlighting the fact that this is yet another smorgasbord of good things. And so it really is amazing to continue to see the great work that all of my colleagues have been doing. I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up. So much has already been said. Por nuestra salud y bienestar. Let me just tell you how important that is. And so for my communities of color, let me be very clear that this is a necessity. It is tied directly to what we heard last year when Dr. Gales presented to us and told us about the challenges that we face in terms of race being a social determinant of health. It is something that ties directly to us talking about racism being a public health crisis led by Councilmember Juando. These are things that we've known for years. It's the reason why we stood up our minority health initiatives. It's why we've continued to invest tremendous amounts of money in continuing the work. I've had very in-depth conversations with our executive side over this past weekend in talking about how we need to continue to do more. And I'm happy to hear that they understand why this is so important and will be supporting us in this effort as we put forth this initiative and then look at an initiative dealing specifically with our African-American Black community that unfortunately is dying at higher rates. Just as you heard from Councilmember Navarro, we certainly are seeing more of the actual transmission of the disease in our Latinx community. But the reality is that we also have folks that are dying at higher rates. We know it's because of a lot of those predispositions that we have regarding health inequities. And so I've been working with our African American Health Program, with Ms. McMillan, with HHS to make sure that we are creating something that will address some of the needs that we have there too. And what I smartly think that I want to give kudos to Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Albornoz for their work on is leveraging the federal CARES money to make sure that we do that as well, because this is an initiative dealing directly with our response to COVID-19 and the challenges that we face. So kudos to both of you. This is great, and it served as a great template for us to help address some of the issues that we're seeing in the Black African American community. So thank you for your partnership. I really appreciate that. Going to V, again, there's not much more that needs to be said, and I don't want to take anything. I know that Councilmember Glass has not spoken yet, and I know that he's our lead on homelessness, so I'm going to leave that for him. It's just a great thing for us to do. Of course, when it comes to Indigenous people, that's a great one. Mobile health crisis item T. Look, the behavioral health hotline Councilmember Friedson and I think we're at the last every mind at the finish line and at the starting line. During one of their fundraisers where they try and raise money and also raise awareness for what's going on in our community. So again, we find ourselves as a council being incredibly supportive of all of these initiatives well before COVID-19, well before any of the things that have hit, before it became sexy to talk about mental health. We've been talking about mental health and trying to stand this up. And so we should also, at the same time as we talk about the fact that we need to do more, also give ourselves credit for the more that we have done. Because I can tell you, standing up the types of programs we have are models, not only for this region, but for the nation. And so we continue to invest in great models, and that makes it easy because the work is already being done. We just need to do more of it. Mailing ballots, already talked about that. That's very clear. I did want to talk about item P, hospitality and tourism support, coming from the hospitality industry before joining the ranks of elected office. Let me just tell you how important this is. I have friends, personal friends, who have lost their jobs. I know people, and I can tell you right now, the layoffs are getting immense. The region is struggling, and they are hemorrhaging. And that means that good people with long-standing jobs who've been working for a very long time at these various hotels and tourism entities are now just absolutely struggling. And so a way in which we can try and build up a marketing effort for us to make sure that people know when it's safe to do so, we want to promote this region for tourism again and hospitality is just incredibly important. And so I think that, this $200,000 will be well spent in terms of the millions of dollars in revenue that will result from us being able to stand this back up and get this industry back on track. Just very quickly, item J, when it comes to the medical and dental practices, thank you for your leadership, Councilmember Albornoz. I told Councilmember Albornoz when he reached out to me, and he's such a great chair because he reaches out all the time and says, hey, I'm thinking about this. And I said, Councilmember Albornoz, I just received a note from my dentist for my children who's in Montgomery Village, Liliana Cuervo, and she was like, and is a local dental practice, right, a small one, and was talking about how they are struggling and how they're really trying to get the word out, and is primarily Latinx in that community, and trying to get folks to just understand they still need to go in for cleanings, they still need to go in for preventative care. That shouldn't stop. And so that's why this is so important, because we know how much health is tied not only to just medical, but dental as well. They're inextricably linked. And so I really want to thank you for your leadership, Councilmember Albornoz, in recognizing that and making that happen. Of course, another thing from our HHS committee, our developmentally disabled persons, and making sure that those payments remain in a time in which we know that parents and families are struggling. It is important to make sure that that vital service is consistent. So again, I thank each and every one of my colleagues for all of their great work in making this another phenomenal consent calendar. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to my colleagues. I think Councilmember Rice, I think last time you said it was chock full, but we can use a lot of different adjectives. Anytime you go to letter W, I think this is one of the longest consent calendars I've ever seen. You've almost got the whole alphabet, so there's a lot in here. I will go through quickly and highlight a couple things more in depth. I want to thank OLO for all the work that they've been doing. Chris and the team, you guys are a superstar team. We're releasing several reports, one of which I'll speak about in a moment, but just wanted to thank you for all the ability you guys have shown, you and your entire team, Chris Seelar, Office of Legislative Oversight. It's really helpful during this time, so thank you. One of those reports is a report that I asked for last year looking at local policing data and best practices, which will be released today. This details disparities of stops and arrests by Montgomery County Police, showing some things that are very disturbing. African-American residents stopped 3 more times than our white residents, 2 more times for our Latino residents. It also shows that there's some work we need to do on best practices and how we collect data and what we collect. I've had significant challenges trying to get data from police department. I know council staff has as well. And so it's really important as we try to reimagine public safety that we have the data to do so. And that's part of the work. And this, I think, will lay a great foundation for the Police Advisory Committee and also for work that I know the executive and we are a part of, trying to do a deep dive into our police data. So thank you for your work on that. And I know there'll be a public safety hearing on that, and there'll be more discussion about that report. I also wanted to mention this is a great day for our Indigenous people. Not only did when we took action on the Washington football team name, did they immediately jump in and hear that we introduced a resolution and decide to change the name. We're going to formally pass that today, that resolution, but also Councilmember Navarro's resolution on Indigenous Peoples Day, which is such an important and long overdue change. So I want to I think we're taking two great steps for our Indigenous peoples here in recognizing the history and the legacy of discrimination that remains. So really, really happy about that. And thank you to my colleagues for that. Thank you to Councilmember Hucker and to the entire council for the 6 clinical social workers, clinical behavioral health staff, rather, for the mobile crisis team. This is a game changer. It is going from one unit to being able to have regional units going forward is a huge component of our mental health and wellness strategy, but also of our policing strategy. So this is going to be a big, big win, and want to thank HHS and Councilmember Hucker and everyone for working on that. Moving fast here, the next thing I wanted to mention was the mail-in ballots. So appropriate that we would be, the day we're honoring Congressman Lewis, who dedicated most of his life to fighting for rights like voting rights, and unfortunately had to watch the Voting Rights Act gutted and not restored before he passed. But this is such an important seminal right. He used to say it's almost sacred, the right to vote, and we want to extend that to everybody in as many ways as possible. So I underscore all the comments that my colleagues made about the importance of this in the one of the biggest elections in our lifetime, that we want to make sure people can get out and vote during a pandemic in as many ways as possible. And mail-in ballots certainly are a key part of that. Also want to thank Councilmember Friedson for the appropriation, and Councilmember Albanaz. It was great to work with you to expand this funding to every mind. As you mentioned, whether it's our students in our schools, just people in general dealing with mental health crises during COVID, this money is only the tip of the iceberg of what we're going to need to do around our mental health strategy. And it's very, very important to extend these critical services. And thank you, every mind, for your work on this. You all are doing great work, and I know it's difficult, but we recognize that, and that's part of what this money is about, so you can continue that work. And then I just wanted to speak briefly to two things, the NDA, and I know Councilmember Glass will talk about this. I'm really glad we're stepping up to put more money into the rental to subsidies for rental assistance and eviction and homelessness. This is critical. I'm also working on a resolution that hopefully we will do next week to call on the governor to extend the eviction moratorium until January 31st. We know that we need to do both things. We need to have support for people right now, and we also need to allow more time. And we need support from the federal government, obviously, and the state government as well. And I know Delegate Barve, who chairs our committee of jurisdiction, has written a similar letter to the governor asking for that extension. And I think we should support that in the most urgent way possible. So I'll leave that, and really excited about this appropriation. And finally, to the program dollars for our Latino Health Initiative, in the initiative that will help address some disparities, again, that we've been talking about and asking for data since day one of this pandemic, so that we could dig into it. Really want to thank Council Members Navarro and Councilmember Albanaz for their work on this initiative. I agree with all of you, including Councilmember Rice, and I've been talking to the African American Health Program as well, about the work we need to do in all of our vulnerable communities. One of the things when looking at the data, the death rate is certainly much higher for African Americans, but and I think for our public, just to know, it's 85.2 per 100,000 is the death rate for Black residents. It's 74.7 for white residents, 66.2 for Hispanic residents. And you heard about the test positivity rates that were unacceptable in the Latino community. There's another trend in here that I think just shows the complexity and how much work we have to do around these disparities and why racism is a public health emergency. If you look at who was tested in June, the last full month we have, in raw numbers, the Black and Latino community, for example, are, Latino communities slightly larger, probably 22% of the population, African Americans 20% are Black residents. But Black residents only were tested a total cumulative amount of tests at 2,385 tests, compared to 6,663 for Latinos. Neither one is enough, but the Black residents, who are almost 20% of the population, only had 2,000 tests in June. You know what that tells me is that we're missing whole segments of the community. And so we have to ramp up who's being tested. And so I don't even know if the positivity rate is right based on who we're talking to. And so it just underscores the need for this effort, but also much more. And I really remain concerned about that. And we have to understand, because I think if we had more tests, we would have a higher positivity rate potentially in the Black community, which underscores the need for this. So certainly supportive 1,000%, but we have to do more. The other thing is that, if you look at our Black community, it's very diverse, right? African immigrant community, West Indian community, descendants of slaves here in the United States. And so there's different issues. Some have language challenges, some don't. And we just have not met the challenge. And I know the administration is working on that. But that's why I just really want to thank Council Members Navarro and Albanaz for setting out a model here that I think can be used and expanded for other communities. So I just wanted to underscore that. And with that, I yield, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to jump in very quickly. We still have two council members that want to speak as well. They will right after I am. Let me just say very clearly, I associate myself with everything that's already been said. I don't need to go down the list and thank each person individually. I think that what we are doing on this consent calendar is the right thing to do. And I believe that each item that has already been addressed has already been mentioned on why it is the right thing to do. But I did want to just, for very quickly, talk about item 2H, 2H, which is the action on the operating budget for the mobile crisis response team. I want to thank everybody for their collaboration and thoughtful deliberation that has actually moved this resolution forward. I want to thank the clinicians who are actually doing the work, who are the county's existing mobile crisis team, for reaching out to all of our offices, and my office as well. They shared their experiences, their ideas for improving service delivery to our most vulnerable residents. We heard them loud and clear, and we want to continue to seek their advice as we develop a strategic, holistic crisis response team. The addition of 6 licensed mental health clinicians to the Department of Health and Human Services is going to go a long way in increasing the capacity of our already exceptional mobile crisis unit. And we are one step closer to ensuring that all residents who experience mental health crisis receive appropriate therapeutic responses. We did a good job. We are doing a good job. It's just that not enough people are doing it. It's not just, but it's just so because so many people, we have so many needs and not enough time to get there. So this will help correct that. And with that, I'm going to turn to Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and for everybody's work. We've had a lot of different names for the calendar. I'll go back to one I used earlier in this pandemic, and I called it the collaboration calendar. And so this definitely is befitting of that and all the work that we've all been doing together. I'm going to limit my comments to 3 particular items. The first one is item V, the special appropriation for rental assistance and homelessness prevention. Earlier in this pandemic, I led our efforts to create a $2 million program providing rental support for residents who were at risk of losing their homes, because the last thing we wanted during this pandemic was for people to experience homelessness and be forced out of their homes. And with the health and economic situation facing us, renters are still struggling to stay in their homes. And with the eviction moratorium to be lifted later this week, we all know that renters are extremely anxious and residents are extremely anxious. And we as a council might not have the statutory authority to call for a rent moratorium. We know that in the state of Maryland that lies with the governor, but we do have the ability to help people and particularly help them with financial assistance. And this emergency fund will provide that much needed relief to ensure that vulnerable residents are safely able to stay in their homes during this pandemic. And I think it's only fitting that this $20 million that's being introduced today is also being introduced on the same day that we take final action on Bill 720, which expands the work and the mission of the Interagency Commission on Homelessness. Because what we're signaling today is that this council and this county is doing everything that we can to make sure that residents are safe and secure in their homes. And so I look forward to being able to roll this out next week and the weeks thereafter as rent is due yet again, and appreciate the comments that everybody has shared in that regard. Item S is the next one I'd like to speak about, and that's the resolution to support mail-in ballots to all voters in November. This is so simple. The upcoming election is likely going to be an election with the largest turnout ever. And we want to make sure that this process is as seamless for people to exercise their fundamental right to vote. That is what all of this is about, exercising our right to vote and selecting our leaders here in this country. And if we look at the most recent election, the June primary election that was held here in Maryland, more than 90% of Marylanders voted with a mail-in ballot. So to ignore the fact as we plan for our November election would be foolish. Every voter should be mailed a ballot just as it's done in so many other states. And I believe that not to do so increases health risks for Maryland residents and has the potential to reduce voter participation as well. So thank you to my colleagues who drafted that resolution. And then lastly, item W, the resources to support communities of color here in Montgomery County. And we know that the data are telling us that there is incredible need, and the initiative that is provided for in this resolution will provide a lot of help to the communities that we know are struggling. The data does not lie, and I really want to thank Council members Navarro and Albernaz for leading on this initiative and for continuing to speak out for the Latinx community and other communities here that have a disproportionate impact or have been disproportionately impacted by this COVID crisis. And again, there are folks around in this country who don't like looking at the data, but the data doesn't lie. And I appreciate their leadership in putting this forward and making sure that we do right by safely protecting all of our residents and making sure that they are as healthy as possible. I yield back, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Raymer.
Thank you so much. Lots to say. Thanks to my colleagues for all of their great words. I'll run through it as fast as I can. I want to start with the OLO report on the local policing data and best practices. I'm really glad to see that. I had also requested that report based on work that I was doing with Robin Gaster, and I know Councilmember Jawando separately requested that report. And great minds think alike. So we're going to have a really useful resource for this commission to come together and get going on a really data-based policy strategy. Pleased to see the final step forward for the Maryland Technology Council and the business task force that they're convening to support our life science and tech sectors to either rebound or accelerate during this crisis. I think it's going to be a terrific initiative, as the county is home to some of the world's leading innovation in vaccine research and manufacturing. There's tremendous opportunity. We also have sectors that are hit very hard, and pulling together our CEO and our venture capital and our executive community work together and help our economy rebound is going to really pay off. So I'm excited about this program moving forward. Congratulations to Jeffrey Markowitz for your appointment to the HOC board. We're really looking forward to what you're going to do there. That's a great appointment. Compliments to the county executive for that. Certainly, I want to put an exclamation point on Councilmember Rice's comments about the Conference and Visitors Bureau. This funding is really going to be essential, and I'm pleased we're able to move forward with this. Thank you to Kelly Groff. She's done an amazing job, and her team has done an amazing job during what has been a very challenging time for them. They've been on furlough. I don't think any other county partner, county funding partner has been on furloughs. And they have been. So this will help them keep lights on and help the sector rebound. I mean, the goal here is to help the sector market and strategize and rebound. And you may have seen comments from Marriott CEO over the weekend, Arnie Sorensen, who's very pessimistic about their prospects. So we've got some real issues ahead of us. I am really pleased about the resolution on mailing ballots to the voters. This move by the governor is voter suppression. That's all it is. It's at a scale that it is staggering. You often see voter suppression tactics, that maybe seem more localized, underfunding a board or something like that. This is the entire election, and unfortunately, I think it is likely that the virus transmission level could be higher in November than it is today if the raging inferno of transmission outside of the state makes its way back here, which it very well could. And not to have a full-scale mail-in ballot strategy in place. To Councilmember Albornoz's comment, who would want to be an election judge? We should be very concerned about our ability to get election judges who are often seniors. We have high school students and seniors who provide that support, and will they feel safe in that capacity? This is a terrible, terrible problem, and it follows a long track record of Republican voter suppression tactics, and it's disturbing to me to think about our governor, who has made many good decisions, seems to be potentially pivoting and playing to a different audience. And we need the governor to do what's right for Maryland and keep us safe and allow us to have an election that is, free from fear of getting sick as a result of exercising your right to vote or of supporting an election by being a judge. We need to reverse this decision now. We have no time to waste. Thank you to Councilmember Navarro for the Indigenous Peoples Day, resolution. This is an issue that I have often wanted us to tackle, but it is in a moment like this when you can really move things quickly. And so, to have this come forward, I hope we can move it through quickly, because it can be a too many people will argue this point in a normal time. And so we need to be taking advantage of this kind of moment to put things through that otherwise we would have been a laborious process. So I'm glad this is happening. It needs to happen. It should have happened some time ago, just like the song, just like the naming of the football team. All of these things, we've got to get them through now. Strike while the iron is hot. On the $20 million appropriation for rental assistance, I've been part of the mission team on housing, working with the executive branch to understand what the need is. And thank you to Councilmember Glass for your work on this early on. We may need more funding, but the benefit of this funding is that it helps stabilize both tenants and their housing providers. So it's really a twofer, because it's ensuring that the buildings will be able to withstand this storm as much as the tenants. It's a win-win, and we need both parties to, we need to support both the tenants and the property owners, frankly, because everybody's got to get through this somehow. It doesn't do us any good to have buildings going under and needing to raise rents and all these kinds of things. So I view this as really a critical investment for us to be making, and it is kind of a back of the envelope calculation as to how much money is needed here. But we'll monitor this very closely. I think we can just bring this straight to full council and get it out the door as fast as possible, and then we can follow up in September with some committee work to just get a better sense of how it's happening. Final point is on item W. Really want to salute Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Albornoz for their work in pulling this together. Back in April, the council sent a memo to the county executive, which I primarily authored, that asked questions about what their plan was for working with our community clinics. And, the answer that we received at that time was, it's in progress. We're working on it. And then week after week, we would have questions directed at the county executive's team. Where are you on working with clinics? Where are you on these enhanced strategies for our vulnerable communities? And a lot of times the answer was, we're in discussion. We're working on it. Well, it's long past time for discussion. It's time for action. And I think this appropriation is really going to force the issue. And when we learned that 74% of all new cases in June were among our Hispanic residents, that was the alarm bell that we were also ringing all along. I mean, from the very first moment, council members, especially Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Albanese, but council members have been calling for an aggressive effort, culturally competent, aggressive effort, targeting our vulnerable communities. And here we are 4+ months later, forcing the issue with an appropriation that gets it done. I'm glad that this is moving forward. It's badly needed, and we've got to take action. So a terrific consent calendar, a lot of powerful elements here. Thank you to my colleagues.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councilmember Friedson, seconded by Councilmember Rice, to approve our consent calendar. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item that we have is the district council session. Might I remind my colleagues, we're already 35 minutes late, and that Dr. Gales will be here at 11, so we're going to have to stop this as he gets here. But the first item that we have is an action item for the extension of time for council action on the Germantown plan for the town sector zone. Ms. Dunn, I guess, will explain that to us.
Hi, good morning. As you know, the council held their full work session on the Germantown plan on June 23rd. The council had received the plan back in November, and the Fed committee had held its work session in the end of February. The council had been teed up to really review this plan sometime in the April timeframe, but as you know, the change to the council schedule, given its review of the budget, its inability to hold more than one meeting per day, prolonged the ability of the council to hold some of its actions. So while the council did hold its work session within the timeframe, there is a codified mandate for the council to approve, amend, disapprove, basically take action on a master plan within 240 days. That time frame would have expired on July 5th. So what this extension does is it allows the council to approve that extension as if it occurred on July 5th, and will extend it for 60 days because that is the standard time period that's codified in the county code.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer is the chair of Fed. Do you have anything to add to that?
Nope. I will make a motion if one is needed. We need to do this in order for us to approve the Germantown sector plan.
Yeah, a motion is needed, so you're so moving. It has been seconded by Councilmember Rice. I see no other discussion on this item. All those in favor of extending the time, please raise your hand. And we have a unanimous decision. Thank you very much. The next item that we have is an action item, and it's zoning text amendment 19-08, bicycle parking requirements and design standards. The Fed committee did recommend approval with amendments. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I imagine the planning team is on the Zoom, and so we can try to turn to them for I think what should really be a very abbreviated, explanation. Jeff Science was the council staff lead. We did go through this, at length to get a better understanding of it, but this is really just about implementing the vision of our bicycle master plan and our intentions for promoting biking as a means of transportation. It creates adequate parking requirements, and we worked through some detailed and somewhat nuanced issues on this at committee. I think if Jeff could give us a very brief overview. If council members have questions, of course, we'll spend as much time as anybody would like to spend on this one. But we did work it through at committee, and given the enormity of our agenda today, it might be something where we want to just keep moving generally and defer to the committee. But of course, council members will proceed as they wish.
Thank you. Councilmember Zines, please. Mr. Zines.
Well, thank you for that.
Well, I don't know if that's a step up or not, but anyhow.
This ZTA is a fairly comprehensive amendment to the parking requirements for bicycle. It enhances those requirements as guided by the bike master plan that the council adopted. The committee did make a few changes to this, as long as I can find that. They changed the requirement for bicycles for religious assembly, and by the way, that's a sort of a necessary change to go from religious institutions to religious assembly, because that's a definition in the land use distinctions. But it would require one space per 200 seats or 2,000 square foot of gross floor area. That is a new requirement, and there's a maximum of 25 bicycle parking spaces for all uses in a single building. The requirement for a bicycle repair facility, which is a new requirement, would be limited to only commercial buildings with more than 50,000 square foot of gross floor area. And the third amendment from the committee was to delete the single reference to the American Disabilities Act, not because the committee did not want compliance with the American Disabilities Act, but because that applies to every provision when you build something. Those are the provisions. This is an amendment that will cost developers some more money, but it's designed to reduce the barriers for bicycle use. And certainly with the pandemic, we've seen more bicycle use, and we want the council wants to promote that when people get back to work and when new development provides these facilities.
Thank you. I did want to note that I do appreciate that you had to park your bike right behind you, I noticed. So
shows how much we need better parking.
We needed this legislation. Thank you, Joe. Councilmember Reamer, anything else?
No, we have a committee recommendation before us.
Very good. And I see no speakers on this. Is there? Well, we don't need a motion. So all those in favor, Ms. Nunn, is there anything else before we vote?
This is a science one.
Oh, this was Jeff. Jeff, anything else before we vote?
No, there's nothing before you. Just the planning board did a great job, very comprehensive job on this, and they deserve the council's thanks on it.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Friedman would like to speak, please.
No, I'm fine. I think Mr. Zions covered the religious institutions. I just thought that was an important one since it generated a significant amount of committee discussion. I think we reached the appropriate balance, understanding that these are multi-use facilities that are unique in their functions, and so we tried to reflect that while keeping the spirit of the zoning text amendment for bicycle facilities. I think we reached a good outcome and one that was thoughtful and reasonable, didn't place too much of a burden, but allowed for the opportunities for the bike facilities. So appreciate it, and that was all I was going to note.
Thank you. It is a committee. There is a committee recommendation to approve it with amendments. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous as well. Thank you very much. The next item that we have is an action item for the Germantown plan for the town sector zone. There again, we have about 15 minutes that we can discuss this before Dr. Gales gets here, and I'm assuming he'll be on time. So we will probably begin this, hear from Dr. Gales, and then get back to this. Councilmember Reamer, are you leading it off, or is Ms. Doing?
Well, so normally this would not be something where we would need to have a lot of discussion because this is the language that we approve that implements the decisions that we really made in our previous discussion. You know, we do the master plan before the council, we cast our vote, and then the staff comes back to us with the language that reflects our vote, and that's kind of a verification process so that we make sure that the language of the resolution is what we intended, and 99.9% of times that is the case. It's the case here as well. The issue is, to the extent that there is any issue, some of my colleagues, maybe all of you, have been receiving some emails from some of the residents of the plan area who are unhappy with one of the recommendations of the plan. And they feel that it's a bad recommendation, and some of them have said that they were unaware of the recommendation in the plan. As Pam said earlier, the committee did its work on this in, I think you said it was February, and so it has been, kind of out there. Like, we made our recommendation in February. That recommendation has been public March, April, May, June, and now through into July. One of the changes that we made in the plan, we received a request from a property owner who wants to do senior living facilities, in this plan area. And so we asked that property owner to sit down with council staff or planning staff and let planning staff, make a recommendation to us. And planning staff made a recommendation to us. We discussed that in committee, and we ultimately approved a revision to that from what the planning staff had recommended. Planning staff then notified the HOA, and they mailed a notification to the HOA. And unfortunately, the HOA didn't do its job of informing its members about that, it appears. And so some of those members have said, hey, we didn't know. It puts us in a tough spot to revisit decisions based on what HOAs do with the information that we give them. It sort of says we'll change our process based on the effectiveness of an HOA's participation in the process. And that is something that's, generally speaking, kind of untenable for us to say, if the HOA doesn't do its job, then we'll stop our process, and undo everything or whatever. So it's a difficult request that we've been asked we've essentially been asked to, not accept this recommendation after we've already embraced it, or somehow undo the process. Councilmember Rice may be able to provide some kind of on-the-ground understanding here of the properties and the issues, and I'll certainly turn to him for that perspective. But again, you've all received these communications. If a council member makes a motion, we can go into it in more depth. The planning board and the staff is prepared to talk about that property if anybody wants, and why what we recommended was reasonable. I think that's kind of the ultimate test: is did we recommend something that's reasonable or not? If you think we did something reasonable, then let's proceed. If you don't think we did something reasonable, then let's not do something we don't want to do. So I think it kind of falls down ultimately on that kind of key question. I guess that's my summary. I'll turn it now to Pam, and then back to you, Council President.
Thank you. Pam, Ms. Dunn, did you have anything to add on that? Then I'm going to turn to Councilmember Rice.
Sure. I'll try to make it brief. The only thing I will remind the council is you did hear from the property owner of the property in question. It is the Churchill Senior Living property. This property owner did ask for more height and density at that public hearing. They do provide affordable senior housing, so not just senior housing, but housing for people well below the NPDU level. And what they came to ask the council was they want to expand their facility, and they want to also provide an urgent care facility on site. So there was a lengthy discussion not only at the public hearing, but also at the committee, and then at the council work session, you were reminded of that conversation. And what I will say, though, is also at the end of the public hearing, on the record, Councilmember Reamer suggested that the property owner and planning staff worked together because the planning board draft had come up with less density and height than the property owner was requesting. So it was public knowledge that those two entities would get together. They would discuss what made sense, what was reasonable for this site. And what came back was the recommendation that went before the committee, which was unanimously approved. And the same recommendation then came before the council and was unanimously agreed to also at the council. And the only other piece I'll add is that, planning staff had done a great job doing their outreach for the plan. They have information on that. They've sent it to us. It's what they do when they master plan, and they're experts at it. So they had done good outreach to this community. There were several HOAs in the area. It is unfortunate that this HOA, these residents don't feel they were communicated with. Again, that's an issue between an HOA board and the members of that community. It's not a nice thing to say, but it's not the council's prerogative to manage how an HOA operates. I'll say that. And it was noticed, the public hearings were both noticed in newspaper as well. So they aren't just reliant on noticing to the HOAs, they're reliant on advertising in the newspaper. I'll just add those pieces of information.
Okay, thank you. Before I turn to Councilmember Rice, we're going to have to go back because I just been told that the ZTA on the bicycle parking actually needed a roll call vote. So let's do that in case we get interrupted from this, please. So, Madam, we're back on the action item for the ZTA 1908. And Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Girondo?
Yes.
Mr. Girondo votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Albanoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albanoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Hooker?
Yes.
Mr. Hooker votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes. So that
Katz
carries.
votes yes.
So that carries unanimously. Not a surprise from the hand vote, but so now that officially makes that. And now we're turning to Councilmember Rice. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I actually think this, I'm not sure who else is on the list, but this discussion may actually be quick and get us out in time for our discussion at 11 o'clock. As a district council member, I know this project very well. I was supportive of the project a few years back when Churchill expanded their site to add an additional building. So this is now another building that's added in. As Ms. Dunn and Mr. Reamer said, this actually represents affordable senior housing in a place that not only is convenient in terms of location, where you have a number of different amenities that are close by, but it also is a ride-on metro, a ride-on stop. Ride-on actually comes to this facility and connects, and they have a bus that actually takes folks on specific trips if they need to go other places. I mean, to talk about what it is that we want to do in terms of encouraging more affordable senior living for folks in Montgomery County, folks, this is it. I do understand the concerns. Look, no one wants to have another building in a view shed when they were happy with trees that were there. My father, as many of you know, I've said this over and over again in many of the hearings, lives literally right across the street. So in the next development over, and in Waters' house. And I can tell you that he walks our dog, Cody, up and down that same path that all the folks are talking about. So I understand. I understand where folks are concerned, what they're talking about, all of those kinds of things. But the reality is that it's still beautiful, and it still will be beautiful. And we get to share it with more seniors who are trying to age in place here in Montgomery County and have a supportive place to do that. And that's why this project makes sense. And so, well, I certainly understand that there are going to be some folks who don't agree and don't want it to be there. I would say the overwhelming majority of people certainly understand why this project is important and support it in terms of its overall premise. And that's the reason why I think we should vote to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no other speakers. Mr. Councilmember Reamer, did you have anything else to add on this? Ms. Dunn, did you have anything else to add on this?
No.
All right, so let me ask the question before I get told after the fact. Is this a hand vote or is this a roll call?
It's a roll call.
It's a roll call. Okay. So, was this a recommendation by this was a recommendation by the committee, is that correct? Even though it was forever ago, it was a recommendation.
It's not by the full council.
Yeah, it's the full council's master plan recommendation that we are now enacting as a resolution.
We're memorializing the council's preliminary action from previously.
So does that mean that we need a motion or we don't? Why don't we have a motion? It wouldn't be terrible to have two. So go ahead.
Let's approve the resolution before us.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilmember Reamer, seconded by Councilmember Rice. Yes, yes. Seconded by Councilmember Rice. And Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Gerando?
Yes.
Mr. Gerando votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Mr. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Albanaz?
Yes.
Mr. Albanaz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes.
So that carries unanimously as well. Thank you very much. And Councilmember Rice was correct. We actually came in before 11 o'clock. So wonders never cease. Okay. And with that, is Dr. Gales on the call? I see Dr. Stoddard's name. Yes, Dr. Gales is there. How are you, Dr. Gales?
Good morning. Okay, sorry, there's a little bit of a delay.
We are going to begin as the council sitting as the Board of Health. So please, if you could give us an update on what is going on.
Sure. Good morning, council members. I will keep the update brief and allow for questions. There are a number of...
But let me interrupt 1 second. Are you under a time constraint?
Always, but
no, always. I understand. That's why I asked.
I think we're good until probably noon.
Yeah, okay.
What is taking up a little bit of time will come up in my updates. As some of you may have read in the Baltimore Sun or seen on the news this morning. But thank you for that. In terms of our numbers, we have continued to kind of ride a plateau over the last 3 weeks in terms of our case numbers. We have seen significant increases in our testing volume. In fact, there was one day over the weekend where we had over 5,500 samples resulted. And as a result, we are testing more. Our average daily testing has increased, including the county contribution to that. And we're finding on average somewhere between 70 to 80 cases a day. We've had 87 cases reported this morning. Our test positivity is now 3.43%, which is lower than the state average of 4.45%, and actually lower than 13 different jurisdictions across the state. We have now tested 12.7% of our population, and we've conducted over 160,000 tests across Montgomery County. When looking at our dashboard information, we have seen our hospital numbers stay fairly stable. And in conversations with the hospital leadership this week, things are moving along, kind of consistent with where the county overall numbers are. However, the one indicator that does give us some pause is that our R0 value, the viral transmission rate, has been sitting above 1 for the last few days, and is actually sitting at 1.1. We had Dr. Wu, who sits on our advisory panel, conduct viral transmission rates for the state as well as our jurisdiction. And from my understanding, the state R0 value is approximately 1.36, which is higher than where we are. Now, I share those numbers because one of the things that has popped up, if you've noticed the state numbers in the last week, is that they have been trending upward. At the same time, our numbers have been fairly stable. In fact, the trends that have happened over the last week or so is the majority of the cases now are coming from the Baltimore metropolitan area. In the beginning and for most of the pandemic, about 50 to 55% of cases were coming from the National Capital Region. Now it's shifted, where approximately 30 to 35% of the cases are from National Capital Region, and 50 to 55% of those cases are coming from Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel through that corridor. Now, we have seen increases in cases in those areas in the last week. We've also seen the state test positivity average hover around the 4.5 to 4.6% range, which suggests that there are increases in cases in other areas. Now, that prompted a number of health officers from the larger jurisdictions within the state to send a private communication to our boss, Deputy Secretary Phillips, to ask the governor to take some consideration in terms of offering some advice, some input on the increase in cases over the last week. And a number of different jurisdictions are looking at exploring potential restriction of activities to address the increases in their areas. I want to be clear that as we stand right now, we have not seen a significant increase comparable to those other jurisdictions. However, we're not going to wait and be complacent to wait for numbers to increase to have some sense of action. So we continue to monitor all of our trends and the data that we're looking at to get a sense of where we're moving. And so we consistently sit in the plateau, but as we have talked about in the last couple of weeks, we're looking at how we can drive those numbers down even more to show decreased burden of the virus in our community. I would like to highlight that we have made a couple of changes to, I know that there is a proposal being put forward in terms of testing. We do have a number of those things in place to date, including an electronic system for scheduling. That has been live for the last week, and individuals are able to utilize that. Now the testing sites are online. You can go to and schedule your appointment. Walk-ups are still allowed and permitted, and we've been able to utilize that. For example, at the Tacoma Park test site last week, we had, I think, there were over 400 individuals who were scheduled, but we also accommodated approximately 160 individuals who walked up for services. Our staff has continued to meet with religious leaders to discuss utilization of different religious facilities to provide testing opportunities. And we do have a couple of sites that have become a part of the rotation. For example, the Silver Spring Civic Center will be conducting testing on Thursdays starting next week. We just finalized that today, July 30th, August 6th, and August 13th. And so we'll be doing testing much like we did last week from 10 to 6. Today we will have testing at the East County Rec Center and utilizing the White Oak Recreation Center. We shifted out from the Veep station due to the heat advisory in place. Our team from CDC will be here for another week providing input and advice. They've conducted surveys of individuals participating in the different testing sites to get a sense of what issues that folks have had in terms of getting testing, their motivation for testing, or any barriers that they may have encountered in that process. And we're looking forward to their analysis to be able to guide our continued steps in those areas. I will stop there because those are the majority of the updates from our last conversation on Friday. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Hey, first off, let me just say that I'm going to put in the 5-minute rule for the council. So, the question to the council is: does anyone want to ask their questions before Dr. Stoddard gives his report, or do you want to wait and ask at the end? Is there anybody? Just raise your hand. Is there anybody that wants to? You want to ask before? Yes. Okay. So we're going to get on the list. Very good. So there's a 5-minute rule here. So the first person to ask a question is Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Dr. Gales, for that update. I did see the letter that you and your colleagues from across the state sent to the state regarding concerns about the governor's health orders. And so let me ask this, because you explained it, I think, fairly well. But here in Montgomery County, we're already in phase 2, and we're already looking to try and reopen. Just in the last week or two, the council approved $14 million for the Reopen Montgomery Business Assistance Program so that we could get back up and running to normal. And so my simple question to you is, do you think we're moving too fast? Do we need to slow things down and start pulling back a little bit?
That's an excellent question. So, interestingly, when looking at us compared to other jurisdictions, and this is not meant to be a critique at all of any of the other jurisdictions, we actually have a more restrictive phase 2 in place. I think we, along with, and a couple of the others have, their phase 2 approach is not as extensive as the overall state plan. For example, we have caps on social gatherings. The state plan does not have caps on social gatherings. And so, and some of the activities that we don't permit are permissible in other areas. So we have actually had a fairly restrictive plan that I think has allowed us to plateau and kept us from seeing an uptick in cases. And what we are doing is we are reviewing our epidemiologic data to see if there's any particular activity or business, anything like that is tied to an increase in cases. Because if there are any decisions to roll back any provisions, we want to make sure that there's a clear, data component that ties to that, because it allows us to say, well, we found that this activity is associated with more cases. By restricting that activity, we hope that the number would go down. And so that's the practice that we are undertaking, as opposed to just blindly saying we're closing this or closing that. Because, again, we want to make sure that we're focused on, focused on what needs to be done to drive the numbers down.
I appreciate the perspective of how we've been operating here in the county compared to other surrounding jurisdictions, because my colleagues and I our inboxes and phones and DMs were flooded with people saying we needed to open quicker, faster, sooner. And we see what is happening around the country, quite frankly. So I appreciate the prudent approach that we've all taken and the scientific data that you've helped provide. But I'm still looking further down the road and recognizing, we're having a very robust conversation about schools. And how we balance all of these incredible needs. And I just want to make sure that as we continue looking forward, that we're not getting ahead of ourselves. I'd rather not take one step forward and 2 steps back.
Sure, and we don't want to, and that's been our approach. Is, like I said, is to be very thoughtful and methodical. And I'm sure some of the same people sitting and filling your inbox have filled mine as well. But it's, we're doing things out of an abundance of caution and safety, because, precisely where we stand right now, we did not want to get to a point where we have to retract or walk backwards because we saw an uptick in cases. And, I think, what folks are asking is that there be a larger conversation about, how to use data to continue to drive those strategies. I don't think any of us want businesses to close or be closed. We would love to be able to open up as much as we can, but we also have to balance that with the need to keep people safe. And if evidence increases that there's certain activities or certain provisions that are tied to increased risk, we have a responsibility to make sure that the precautions are put into place to minimize transmission as best as we can.
If I may quickly, so we attempted to be pragmatic on both sides too, and so, for example, when we observed some issues with noncompliance, particularly in our late night restaurants, bar type atmospheres, there was initial some conversation around: do we just close restaurants at 11 p.m. or do we stop the sale of liquor at 11 p.m. And we thought about those things. And we said, well, let's try and do some education and targeted enforcement first, rather than a blanket rule that impacted everyone, even those who were following the rules. And so we were trying to be practical in terms of pragmatic in both sides. And, if you saw from Mike Ricci, the governor's communications director, he called out Prince George's County and Montgomery County this morning because our positivity rates have remained pretty good because of the enforcement that we're doing and the targeted enforcement of those who are violating. And so we have stronger options to go backwards on, but we're trying to balance out the desire to have our businesses open with our community safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. I know that our conversations have often been somewhat tense. I think it's the nature of the crisis. I really appreciate everyone's incredible efforts, and we're all trying to do the best we can. I know that, speaking for myself, I've been working really hard to just push as hard as I can for action on issues like hospitals and hospital capacity and local production of PPE and masks and testing and tracing. I think working together, we're always going to get more better done faster. Just wanted to kind of make that overarching comment. Dr. Gales, talk to us about your sense of where we're heading here. I think we have managed to plateau things, at the moment, but certainly, it feels like there is a lag time of transmission, and we have so much viral transmission raging outside of the county, and we don't have a wall. We can't stop that from coming into the county. First of all, are we prepared for a potential, resurgence? Could you just talk about some of the key things that you're concerned about, as far as that? And then secondly, what is your outlook generally for the next couple months?
Great question again. So the first piece in terms of our ability to absorb an increase in cases, I think the first component of that is I think we have the advantage of some experience under our belts now. We've as you mentioned, we've been at this for a few months now. I'd like to think we've learned some best practices and messages in terms of being able to implement strategies, whether it is, a system of rolling out PPE, which is in place, an ability to be able to test in numerous places and get increased access to that. A contact tracing system that is in partnership with the state that is robust. We're getting almost 95 to 96% of folks contact within a 24-hour period. Increased community engagement in terms of being able to provide outreach, prevention, education, those kinds of strategies, as well as a system that is able to triage, identify, and connect individuals to much needed social support systems that are needed to help mitigate some of the impact of either testing COVID positive or, having that in place, to need to isolate or quarantine. So I think a number of those strategies are in place already. And then that is in addition to our healthcare system. I think the hospitals within the county have done an excellent job throughout the last 4 months. And they continue to monitor. As I said, we had a really good email exchange in terms of getting updates where they are. Right now, where we stand, the percentage of utilization for their facilities across the board is fairly low. And so there is room to grow, so to speak, in terms of absorbing a potential uptick in cases. And the other component of that is also the notion of immunizations and vaccines. Our team has been, we have reopened our vaccine program and are encouraging folks to bring their children in to their primary care providers as well as county centers in order to utilize those resources. The team has already proactively begun figuring out strategies for the deployment, dissemination of a COVID vaccine. I won't say if we get it, but when we get it. Fingers crossed, there's some recent reports of some promising trials, particularly with AstraZeneca. Their drug was talked about over the last week. So I think we are in a place to be able to absorb. And in the mentioning of plateau, I don't want plateau to be a bad thing. It actually is in this setting where we've seen significant increases across the country as well as increases in other jurisdictions. It actually has been okay. I mean, obviously we want it to go down, but in the grand scheme of things, it's given us a sense of comfort as best as we can. Now, in terms of the outlook, I think a lot of this will be dependent upon the larger standardization of strategies. When we look at some of these other jurisdictions, as you pointed out, that have significant increases in cases, how do they get that virus down, that viral load down? You know, are there face covering mandates put into place? Are there stricter restrictions put into place that minimize transmission risk? Because that also inevitably will influence us as people move back and forth. As you said, we don't have a wall. We can't build a wall around Montgomery County. We wouldn't build a wall around Montgomery County, but we do have to factor in the movement of folks. You know, as people move for work, they go on vacations, they go to different places. We do have to factor that in terms of our strategies. I think that the more proactive we can be to address things, the better. And I'm cautiously optimistic that with ongoing conversations with policymakers at different levels to understand the need to be proactive as opposed to waiting for the numbers to climb up before we put some strategies into place.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Dr. Gales, and Dr. Stoddard, and Dr. Crowell, all for your work. I know you're working feverishly to keep us all safe. And can't be said enough, and really, really appreciate it. Mainly one set of questions. We've been talking today a lot about the disparities, and this is not just today. We've been talking about it for a long time, and I know you all have been focused on it, whether it be our zip codes, in addition to the testing pop-up sites, and a whole range of things. Obviously, we are taking action and introducing a plan to address specifically the issues in our Latino community, as you know and you mentioned. I have a question, and this won't come out of left field for you, Dr. Gales. I raised this earlier this morning in the context of our work around these issues. When you look at the testing rate in June, or the testing numbers, raw numbers in June, I pointed out to the public and to my colleagues that you had, despite representing roughly 20% of the population, our Black community, only 2,000 or so, a little over 2,000 tests had been done, compared to 6,600 in the Latino community and a similar amount in the white community. I think 6,500 or something. I'm not looking at it right now. So almost a 3-to-1 gap there in testing as far as raw tests. Can you talk to me about that, why that might be the case and what you're doing to address it? Underlying that is my concern, as I've discussed with you before, that the Black community is very diverse. You have non-English speakers, but they're also very concentrated in certain areas. Sure. And so I just worry about test positivity rates being accurate compared to those number of tests being issued. So can you just talk to me about that?
Sure. I think the issues that you raised in terms of that may prohibit folks from coming in to get testing or having access to testing, those kinds of things, are not unique to one population. I think that there are lots of vulnerable populations that are influenced by, questions of mistrust of the government, mistrust of the medical system, language diversity in terms of messaging to communities, recognizing the broad range of diversity of languages for folks to understand, in terms of how we communicate messages, how we do outreach. I think also there are universal issues in terms of being able to work with different community agencies to be able to leverage those resources to provide access to not only testing but needs for social support systems, and assistance in that area. So I do think I know that there is a provision that's focused on one particular community, but I think a lot of those same issues permeate through other racial and ethnic groups as well. One of the things that we are working on, and myself and a number of other folks have met with different representatives, for example, with the African American Health Program, to discuss putting together a proposal that addresses some of those issues and talks about increased testing in communities, figuring out where to go, the best venues, who are, again, trusted key stakeholders in communities that may be able to, the message resonates more coming from them beyond this government. So a lot of that work is ongoing.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and I think that the thing that's important to remember is that even though we're focused on COVID-related, fatality rates and test rates, things like that, these overlap very clear, long-standing disparities when we look at chronic disease and heart disease, those kind of things. And I think that's something that we also can't forget, because also addressing those issues thereby has significant influence in terms of potential severity of symptoms if someone does become COVID positive, in terms of their potential prognosis.
Yeah. Well, then that's obviously directly related to the death rate, being highest in the Black community. But what troubles me greatly is that if we're not having large scale testing, in a concentrated community. So I think faith communities, I was glad to hear you're reaching out. I think that is a key community that could be helpful with, culturally competent and linguistically competent based outreach to many communities. And just count me as an ally. I know Councilmember Rice and Navarro and Alvarez and all of us care about this deeply as well. So just want to see that improve. I hope it looks like we're on track from the numbers that I saw. This is my last thing in July to increase that testing number in all communities. So I hope we continue to go in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much. Dr. Gale, so my question is around marketing and advertising of testing, and it ties directly kind of to what Councilmember Joando was just talking about, which has been my concern in our communities of color, which is mainly around understanding where you can access testing. If you simply type in COVID-19 testing into a Google search engine, all of your private providers will come up. You will not see a single government entity as a part of that listing. Even if you go on the marylandhealth.gov website, even there, they list all of the private entities, but it does not showcase our local testing facilities. And so how are we getting, especially into our harder to reach communities, that will do just what I did? Type in COVID-19 free testing and see what sites come up. Because here's the other challenge. I just did it this morning as we were talking on the phone, because I wanted to see what would happen in terms of acquiring a test. And I put in no symptoms at all, and I was still told I was ineligible to get a test at CVS. It also said that the results are 6 to 10 days, which is a part of my secondary question. So my first question is along the lines of how are we advertising for testing and making sure that folks know that these sites are available in our community from a government standpoint, not just private providers. And then also about the wait times in terms of results, and how does that equate to if I'm waiting 6 to 10 days? We've heard from some of our community members as much as the full 10 days. How really helpful is that if we've already then contacted other people and transmitted, especially if we're symptomatic?
Great questions. The first one I think I have more of an optimistic answer than the second answer. So the first question in terms of that, I know the communications team has ramped up their utilization of different platforms, social media, radio, and in terms of being able to do that and provide access to creating, for example, a community calendar that shows which days the different events are on. I know that there is a daily update to all of the test sites. And my EAA Stella does this. It's not a spreadsheet, but a compendium of all of the private sites as well as the public sites that is now, if you go to our COVID-19 county page, it's linked to there, so you can flip through there and look through all of those. I know it was supposed to be, but that was the intention behind that, to link that to that so that people can see the different places. And I think this gets back to, Councilmember Joando's point as well, is, thinking through natural partnerships to be able to facilitate and get that message out even more, so that folks know that, there are sites available, they're open, they're walk-ups, you don't have to, asymptomatic, symptomatic, that there are access points, particularly with the pop-up sites, because that's, what we're trying to do. We have the standing sites, but the pop-up sites are particularly, going as close as we can into the community to be able to have access points there. And I will also point out that one of the other provisions, the ready responder teams have been in place since the weekend and have already gone out and visited folks within their homes. And it creates opportunities if there are specific places that have high volume in the community where, pop-up test sites could be done at location X, where we know that there are a lot of folks who live that may not have access to those other venues. Now, on the second side, in terms of the test notification, this is a significant issue. And it is frustrating because in order to do effective contact tracing, we need you to test, get tested, then test, get your results quickly, and then be able to contact you fairly quickly after that to be able to isolate you and then minimize your network of transmission. Now, the challenge is that, for example, we do give out guidance and say, particularly if you're symptomatic and you're getting tested, you don't have to wait for the results to come back to isolate yourself, or in this setting, quarantine yourself before you come into contact with others. So what we would recommend to folks is, again, particularly if you're symptomatic, is when you get your test, you already know, you're experiencing those symptoms. We would recommend that you quarantine, and this is consistent with what, months ago, and some of this is fatigue and being tired from memory. It's just that if you have symptoms, minimize transmission. Don't come into contact with other folks. So stay at home and stay in place. And even, for example, individuals who are asymptomatic who may have knowingly come into contact with someone else, we ask you to, again, quarantine in place until you get your results, because whether it's 2 days or 6 to 7 days, that's going to minimize the number of contact points you come into contact with and mitigate transmission.
Thank you. Councilmember Auburn-Oz, did you want to go next, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I was going to wait till after Dr. Stoddard, but I know
you might run out of time if you want to speak to Dr. Gales. Yes.
So I want to pick up where Councilmember Jawando left off and just agreeing with him that there's no question we need to stand up as soon as possible a similar strategy as we propose today that really better leverages the community partners who have been on the ground since the beginning of the pandemic, and really for a number of years, who have trust in the community, who know these communities much better than we do in some ways. And so I think the template that we keep referring to is empowering and providing resources to those organizations to work with county government, as I've said before, similar to what we've done in the hub model, which has been community-led, supported by county government, and is now being replicated in other communities. So we have the full expectation of creating something as soon as possible that addresses those nuances that impact the communities that you so perfectly described, Councilmember Jawando, and look forward to working with you and Councilmember Rice and Councilmember Navarro and our entire council to stand up this effort as soon as possible. Because while clearly progress has been made, and I have expressed my appreciation before and will continue to express my appreciation to Dr. Gales and his team and to Dr. Crowell and his team for all of the efforts that have been made to date. This has been an overwhelming situation, unprecedented on so many different levels. But within that, there's an opportunity for us to better leverage those community stakeholders and stand something up more quickly in some ways than the county government can on its own. So we're all on the same page here in trying to move this forward holistically across the board and address those unique nuances and issues as they have arisen. And I just want to state that we are on the same team with the same stated goals, and I just so appreciate that approach moving forward, but especially the stakeholders. And I know our African American Health Program is made up of those same incredible professionals from that community that are ready and just need some additional resources and help to be able to stand up efforts. The same is true of our Asian community. So that was more of a comment, but I did have some specific questions, Dr. Gales. The numbers that we are seeing in Baltimore, what we are seeing in other jurisdictions in other states is that it's young adults, people in their 20s, who unfortunately are not adhering to the guidelines, doing what people in their 20s do, feeling invincible, and have been super spreaders in Florida and in Texas and in Arizona. Is that what we're seeing in the preliminary numbers out of Baltimore? Is it a younger demographic? Are we seeing any evidence of that here? Is that a concern?
Well, I think that as it currently stands, there is a small percentage increase in terms of that population statewide. I can't speak necessarily directly to if that's the sole reason why there's an increase in cases in Baltimore and in that area. I don't think it's the only reason. I think it, can contribute to that. I think the challenge is that even a small increase in cases in young adults who are more likely to be asymptomatic can cause significant problems for others. So you can imagine, unfortunately, I'm not this age anymore, but you can imagine 20 years ago when I was, 20 or somewhere in that neighborhood, that I may be fine, but I'm coming home visiting my parents, I'm seeing grandparents. It just makes it easier to spread to other individuals who may be more at risk for having complications and worse outcomes. So I think let me actually try to pull this up here. Looking at the state numbers from this morning, the percentage of cases below 18 was 7%. And looking at 10 to 19, 9%. 20 to 29 was actually 25%, and that's the highest percentage of new cases by decades moving forward. So statewide, it is a trend. I don't know if it's the sole reason why there's an increase in cases in the BMA area, but it is definitely something that we're keeping an eye out on. We have not seen necessarily a comparable increase in that population from Montgomery County, but we continue to keep an eye out on it.
I appreciate that. And also great news regarding the standing up of the ready responders. That is terrific because I think that will significantly contribute. And I want to highlight two things you mentioned in your update. That is vaccinations, not just specifically, hopefully, when we get one for COVID, but we've been hearing from our primary care clinics that they're very concerned that the number of families that have come in to date woefully are lower than they have been in previous years. And that is a significant issue because those students have to have those vaccinations in order to be able to go to school. Who knows whether we will or we won't. But that, in addition to the public health components, is a serious issue. So if there are any efforts or if you need some additional support from the council in any way to address those vaccination issues, I know you won't hesitate to ask, but please, those community partners, I think, will also be very helpful in that space. And I'm also, I'll just end with this, very happy to hear we're already giving thoughtful consideration to how a vaccination would be rolled out here in Montgomery County. That's going to be a big next wave of this discussion moving forward and obviously has public health implications. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback off of a couple items of other council members. First, related to Councilmember Rice's comments about the lag time. He was referring to CVS, some of the private sector, which we know has been a problem. I raised that in past briefings, 6 to 10 days. What is the turnaround time currently for testing results of the county facilities?
Well,
is it the same? Is it less? Is it different?
It's actually a little bit less, and we, that's one of the logistical issues that we worked on with the particular lab company, the local provider, to address and get results out more quickly. And particularly, so we've had less issues with positive results coming in. We find out those very quickly, and we share that information with disease control right away. It's been the issue in terms of notification of negatives. And so they have worked through their system and put in some new software, which will hopefully alleviate that. And so I do know that there have been, for example, some folks who've experienced longer wait times. We do think that we have fixed that, and that issue has been addressed. And so we aren't, for the utilization of the local laboratory, and on average are not experiencing as long of a wait as some of the private labs.
Okay, so how many days, if we were telling residents if they're hearing 6 to 10 days from CVS, what would the day range be for the county facilities?
Probably somewhere between 5 to 7 days on the extreme end, but we're hoping to get that down to 24 to 48 hours.
Great. I want to piggyback off of what Councilmember Alvarez was talking about in terms of the young adults. I know the governor's been talking quite a bit about this concern and this issue from a state perspective. It might not be necessarily as much of a county perspective, although unfortunately we don't have that separate jurisdictions in the state, certainly. Based off of that, I was looking at the data and I recognized the fact, and this was mentioned to me by one of our senior fellows at the council, that the county's age numbers and our data that we publicly report is based on much bigger groups, 18 to 49. And the state's numbers are based on decile groups, 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39. Given the fact that now this has become a much bigger issue than originally we were talking about, where we're more focused on the older adult population being more vulnerable, et cetera, do we have that data? Are we looking at that data? And can we publicly publish the data in the decile format that the state is currently publicly sharing their data?
Sure. So I get a host of reports on a daily basis, and so some of that information is broken down that way. We can look at changing how it's reported on the public website, but internally we do have access to that data. We do look at it in terms of shaping and guiding how we go, but we'll have an internal huddle to look at how we can change how it's presented to the public dashboard.
Appreciate that. Given particularly that this is a growing concern for a lot of residents, I think that would be very helpful, and obviously it sounds like you already have the data available, so it seems like something that the public would benefit from seeing and knowing. It would help us make the case that we've been trying to make of folks being safe regardless of their age, understanding the risk that they pose not just to themselves but to their families and their neighbors. Last question that I have, we're hearing a lot of reports about businesses who are doing everything that they can to do the right thing, to keep their employees safe, to keep their customers safe, but having concerns of what they're supposed to do if a customer comes and refuses to wear a mask, saying that they have a health condition that doesn't allow them to wear that. Can you speak to what the state requirements are and the county requirements are of what the business is supposed to do in a circumstance? Let's say it's a grocery store, somebody comes to shop, they're not wearing a mask, they say that they have a health reason for why they can't or shouldn't wear a mask, what the business is supposed to do, how they're supposed to handle it. I think this would be really helpful for them to be aware of.
Well, so the expectation is that folks should wear them, and it's a requirement. There are situations and circumstances that we understand, or there are medical conditions that would not allow for a person to do it. And so in those settings, the recognition is that if there is a legitimate medical condition that an individual has to prevent them from being able to wear it safely, then, we say, to make provisions to allow them to be able to use that. Now, the concern is that you can imagine everyone will magically have a medical condition now with that. But the key is if it's a legitimate documented medical condition that does not allow them to wear a covering safely, the recommendation is that they would still be allowed to have provisions to do their shopping and things like that. But in those circumstances, they really are limited to folks with, documented legitimate medical conditions that would prevent them from being able to wear them.
I appreciate the growing concern, and I think that if you could provide some guidance of a best practice for businesses of how to address those situations, that would, I think, would be really helpful, that we could then circulate to folks, because there's growing concern not just from the businesses but from the customers who are frequenting those businesses of how they're supposed to react in that environment.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you so much, Dr. Gales and Dr. Stoddard. I just really wanted to follow up on this conversation and this exchange about what's happening in other jurisdictions in the state, and particularly the issue with our young people. I think that it has been mentioned before. I think we have all learned a lot during this entire process. I think this is obviously what really informed the introduction of that special resolution earlier this morning, that I believe we have all come to a point where we understand that we have a lot of resources and best practices out there, and perhaps there needs to come a point where we have to recognize that a targeted intervention may be necessary. And so as we develop this template in literally 9 days with a lot of input from so many, I think that this will definitely become, hopefully, a model for all these other communities that are disproportionately affected. But going back to this issue of our young people, should we perhaps then start thinking also about some targeted messaging? I think what we have seen in other jurisdictions is very telling. There is no doubt the young people do believe they're invincible. There's no doubt that obviously, whenever things seem to be perceived as, the reopening happening, right? So then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're in phase 2. We can do this. Why not do this other thing as well? And if that is a trend, again, that we've seen in other jurisdictions in the country where we have such, extreme hotspots, learning from that, I think it might be important for us to start having a conversation about targeted messaging. And to be honest, one of the things that really propelled me to work on this Salud Initiative was the same notion that if there are other hotspots, or perhaps not hotspots, but just cases growing in other jurisdictions in the state, it's the same thing within our county. If we're seeing increases in cases in a stable way, in a consistent way in an area of the county, that will have an effect in other areas as well. So there's a parallel there. Do you have any thoughts about that in terms of, again, given that we've learned so much, perhaps now moving into some of this more like targeted efforts whenever we want to be proactive or whenever we need to react to certain areas that we feel we need to address?
Sure. So I agree with you. I think particularly when we identify, as you said, hot spots or hot groups or those kinds of things. Hot groups, that's not necessarily the right word, but you can. The data supports that there is a disproportionate impact there. There can be messages. So, and actually to that end, we're working on those strategies. Actually, as part of the conversations with our colleagues at MCPS around reopening and those kinds of things, we've talked about ways of engaging students in that older group, particularly the teenage group, as well as I think there's an opportunity, particularly around that 18 to 24-year-old cohort, that I would probably, as an adolescent medicine doc, 13 to 24-year-olds, the 18 to 24-year-olds were typically the ones who gave me the most angst when it came to safe practices. So we will, continue to think through that. And again, I think this is helpful, again, working with the community agencies who have penetration within that. As pointed out, I'm not 20 anymore, so I don't speak fluent teenager or young adult. And I think it gives us the opportunity to create some creative opportunities to engage those folks in terms of how to relay those messages in a way that resonates most within that population.
Thank you.
I have an important point to add too, and I think it's important. I think it would be a mistake for us to think only about young people in the irresponsible behaviors. I think we also need to think about the fact that our young people have, crippling debt and things like that force them to work frontline jobs and may potentially also put them at risk for that reason too. So I don't, and I'm not suggesting that you are, Councilmember Navarro.
No, I'm not.
But I think it's that the public realize that we understand that there are it's more complicated than just young people are doing things irresponsibly. There are other things certainly at play here. Again, I want to make sure that everyone understands that we understand that. And so we need to take a look at, the county executive has spoken about, for example, construction sites. A lot of young, particularly people of color, work on construction sites, and we know that the compliance there has not been as good as we would like it to be. And so we've been talking to permitting services about some additional education for construction sites as well as enforcement on those, because we know disproportionately those are younger, tend to be people of color. And so it's just, there's several things at play here that we need to get to the bottom of as it relates to young people. And I think that it's more complex than the national media would have you to believe.
So, right, you're absolutely right. And I just want to clarify, when I'm talking about this, I'm not so much talking about addressing what we might perceive as the behavior, but also like where can we find those young people? So whether it's using Instagram or, anything of that nature, just sending that same exact messaging is so important. It goes back to that conversation earlier also. Councilmember Rice knows this because he's been serving on HHS for so long, that a lot of times when we talk about, the African-American, health program, for example, to reach out into the Black community is also very complex. And we've talked about this, Dr. Gills and Dr. Stoddard, because you have Caribbean folks and it's just a lot of layers. But I think that because the good news is that we do have a lot of relationships in these communities, and I think we can do some targeted outreach and messaging as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, thank you very much. We're going to turn to Dr. Stoddard, and I see Dr. Crowell is also on the Zoom call. Dr. Stoddard, did you have anything else to add, please?
I have a couple things. Obviously, I just want to touch on the heat emergency briefly. We do have cooling centers open today. We did have a minor issue at the Good Hope cooling center, which I believe is wrapping up now. There was a law enforcement issue in the area that did impact, I think, the opening. Well, I think we're supposed to open at 12, so it looks like we're going to move forward with that one okay, but for those who may see, there was a lot of law enforcement activity in that area related to nothing with the county. It was a domestic dispute, apparently, that I think police are finalizing, and we'll have more to say about that. We obviously have had, this has been challenging because we traditionally have a robust recreation and library system that allows us to provide cooling options for really into our communities during normal events. But because many of those facilities are closed for COVID-19, it's left us with the challenge of we've got two competing things here, which is we want to have people away from the heat indoors to escape the effects of heat exposure, but also we have a pandemic ongoing, and so we've had to really do some unique things that we would not normally do to open up some facilities with physical distancing and face coverings and other measures. We've put water onto all of our ride-on bus routes so that they can be essentially mobile cooling centers in all of our communities throughout, with obviously no fares being collected. So that's an option that was available to us that wasn't normally. And also, our homeless shelters have been open for an extended period because of COVID-19, but that also is something that we would not normally have in place over the summers that we do have in place now. That has been it's been indirect benefit of having those shelters open, that we didn't have as many concerns about our homeless population having options because those additional shelters and our normal shelters are open for visitors. A few other things. PPE, we've now made more than $25 million in PPE acquisitions or in the process of acquiring. I don't expect that to be the end of our PPE procurement, but obviously we continue to stock up for what we are concerned about, both now and into the future, particularly over the fall and winter months. I mentioned enforcement and education in one of my questions, but we did issue a handful of citations over this past weekend. We didn't issue any traditional closures or multi-day closures. We did clear out at least 2 establishments who were violating physical distancing. But what we've largely seen is an increase in compliance week over week as we've done additional education and enforcement. And so from that perspective, I see some positive movement. Obviously, we're not perfect. We don't have 100% compliance across the county. We still continue to receive reports of violations. We continue to follow up on those as we receive them. I mentioned the targeted for construction sites, for example. That's been an area where we've seen an uptick in both observed complaints and concerns. And so we're going to make sure that we, always identify those new places where we need to do more work. The food assistance provider grants went live yesterday. This is a collaboration between Health and Human Services, the Healthcare Initiative Foundation, and the Montgomery County Food Council. $1 million for the existing food provider network to number one, expand their capability, but also increase their ability to reach our traditionally more difficult to reach communities. $85,000 is the cap for each organization, but obviously, there's more resources that will come following along there, and we expect to continue to do these kinds of grant opportunities throughout the pandemic. The closed period for that is August 3rd, and the goal is to have the Food Security Task Force review the applications and turn the money around by August 13th. We very much appreciate the collaboration with Council around the submission of the eviction prevention ask for $20 million. This was from the hard work of our homelessness and eviction prevention work group in our recovery framework. Obviously, it sort of shows you the gray between response and recovery, because obviously many of us would view eviction prevention as a response activity. It's largely because it's in the housing network, a much more recovery focused thing. But obviously, it blurs those lines. We recognize that, and it's an imminent need, given that the eviction moratorium is expected to end on the 25th. At this point, we don't expect the court system to be filled up, quite frankly, with COVID-related evictions immediately. Those will take some time to make their way through the system, just given the backlog. But we do want to have something in place in August for our residents to apply for. I did want to talk about the communications. I think it would be great to have a communications update for the council on COVID-19 because of some of the efforts that have been expanding. We are doing a bus shelter and bike kiosk. We are doing targeted geo-targeting of Google and Facebook ads. There are other efforts to try and get into communities that I certainly very much support and agree with the efforts raised by all of you all to try and reach into our different ethnic and populations. And I think that those are going to be extremely important. We absolutely embrace that collaboration. I do think it would be great to highlight some of the other things and try and work together on some of the messaging to expand those capabilities. And I very much support that. I think that's sufficient for the things I'd like to cover today.
Thank you. Dr. Crowell, did you have anything to add?
Good morning, everyone. I'll try to make sure that I stop before morning is over and we get a chance to go. You all get a chance to go get some lunch. Just a couple of things. One is that was an incredibly impressive consent calendar that you all put together this morning, and I wanted to give you all a nod for the focus and the work around both recovery and around the ongoing needs of the community. I think we'll talk a little bit this afternoon about the testing plan and your responses and proposals. So I don't want to get into that until we have a chance to talk about what we've given you and go over the notes this afternoon. Looking forward to engaging with the LHI steering committee around the proposal that underlies the resolution that you all introduced today, and figuring out the fastest strategy to get that implemented, as well as looking at, I think, with colleagues in the Black community about what needs to happen there and in our other communities as well around the system, around the county. I think that a couple of other pieces of information. We are in the process of ramping up our work with the developmental disabilities community to try and make sure that they are moving down a path of recovery that, one, keeps them safe, sorts out how best to get the staff back to work fully and safely, working fully, and how they deal with the necessities of the safety necessities of and protocols for testing and managing staff in a COVID and clients in a COVID environment, and hopefully, and with every intention of doing that, so that by the time we get to the fall and flu season, they are well protected and trained and working in more cohesive and coherent fashion around dealing with the developmental disabilities community. I think the other thing is thank you around the eviction prevention pieces of this. I think that piece of work this is going to be a challenge as the courts open back up and evictions start back up. I think that the work that we have done up to this point has been good, but it is going to now need to ramp up a little bit. We are looking, as we think about responding to communities with individuals who have higher levels of positivity and who are testing positive, how we provide them some direct support, both economically and materially in terms of housing and other kinds of support that they need. That's both not just in collaboration and partnership with the EC plan, the Salud plan, but also across the county. And I think the last thing I will leave you with is that while we're in the middle of all of this, it's important to note that overdose deaths have jumped over the same time period last year. Dr. Stoddard and I continue to chair the overdose intervention team, and in the midst of all of this, those numbers have jumped back this year. So we are not. While COVID-19 has overshadowed everything that we are doing, there is other parts of life and other parts of the work that have to continue and that have continued and have been impacted by that. People who are isolated and cut off from their normal recovery supports have time on their hands without a lot to fill that time. And boredom and time is the enemy of recovery. And I think that's one of the challenges we're left with in COVID-19. So we are absolutely continuing that work, and we'll need to factor COVID-19 into that recovery plan. So stay tuned. I do want to last note is to say that the work on the mobile crisis team effort, I think, has been phenomenal and a good partnership, and we will now go forward and work out the details of that plan to come back with you all in the time required to give you all an update on where we are with things. So stay tuned, and thank you all for the support.
Thank you. I did want to mention, because Dr. Stoddard had brought it up as well, about the rental assistance, that in addition to Linda McMillan working so diligently on it and others, many others, Dr. Stoddard was certainly a major supporter of it and worked with us, as well as the county executive. He too was most helpful during these discussions as well, so that we were able to introduce it just a few minutes ago. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much. And so, Dr. Stoddard, I have a quick question for you, and it may not be something that's directly in your bailiwick, but over the past week, I had actually ridden on our ride-on bus service, and we recently saw WMATA talking about how their strategy regarding public bus service was a concern as the bus routes became more and more crowded as people returned to work. What is our overall strategy? And I applaud us using ride-on buses for water cooling stations, but what is our strategy when it comes to some of our more well-traveled routes? Have we talked about the public safety initiatives that are there? Because I can tell you that on one of the routes, it had started to get kind of tight, and I was actually going to be one who would have gotten up and gotten off to let somebody who maybe needed to get directly to work to get on. But there's going to be a lot of those kinds of considerations. Have we talked a little bit about that? What is our strategy when it comes to standing up a safe and effective transportation system?
Sure. So our reconstitution of county workforce group has talked a lot about how we do this safely and effectively. A couple things. Number one, we're going to look to expand both routes and increase run times throughout our reopening efforts. Obviously, those have largely paused across the community, as Dr. Gales has already alluded to, for reasons that are pretty clear to everyone about what we're seeing around the state and the country. So we are continuing to look at expanding routes and just frequency of routes, number of routes, so that you can reduce the ridership on any given route. The other thing we're also doing is looking at physical modifications to the buses, plexiglass insertions. We've actually talked about doing much of that work, and I think it's actually taking place in many cases already to allow for protection of our workforce as well as our riders. And so it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge moving forward as things with reopening continue. If you're aware of routes where they're particularly challenged, we certainly encourage people to let us know about those things, and we can take a look at. I mean, we have additional capability within drivers who are not working right now to increase routes in places where we're seeing high ridership. And so DOT is certainly monitoring that, and they're paying attention to it. But if you're aware of routes that you're concerned about, please do let me know. I'll convey it over to DOT, and we can work on addressing it.
Thank you very much. And then lastly, just to Dr. Kroll. Dr. Kroll, I unfortunately just was notified by our commander of death that happened here in the 5th District. A son had actually just murdered his father. They're responding to this now. It speaks to what you're saying. And again, I don't want to be presupposing the conditions that are there, but we know that there are many stressors on people, whether it's people that are in recovery, people that are dealing with this situation of a pandemic that affects your mental health and well-being. It affects so much. And so I couldn't agree with you more that there's so much that needs to be done. The money that we put forth is a continuation of good things that go on. But there's no question that we continue to see some of the struggles of folks in our community who are trying to deal with this issue. Is there anything that we're missing in terms of things more that we can do as a council, from a financial support to stand up to ensure that we're providing as many resources and as much support to our community as possible?
So I think that you will never find me saying that we're doing everything that we can do at any given time. That we do what we have with the resources, and I think we are blessed to have a lot of what we need. I think there is a need for increased levels of communication around this. Our emphasis across the entire county has been on one thing for the last 4 months, and everything else has almost dropped off the radar in terms of what we're doing. Figuring out how we understand, and we're doing some work on that. There are a couple of forums that are being put together around COVID-19 and mental health, COVID-19 and stress, COVID-19 and substance abuse. So there's those kinds of things. Everything is in the context of COVID-19, but we also need to be doing more around the interplay of COVID with everything else that we have going on. It is airtime and space in you all's thinking and communication and in our collective thinking and communication that now is going to have to be play a greater role in how we do this going forward. We are, Dr. Stoddard and a number of folks are working on recovery as part of the other part of our work. When we're not talking response, those recovery efforts are focused on increasing the capacity of the community. So interfaith works. We're working with the faith community to try to give them the skills to recognize trauma that COVID-19 has caused in families and communities. We have to, as part of the ongoing work across the minority health initiatives and their programs, to increase the level of awareness around behavioral health, around the mental health strain that has been given us by COVID and by the economic crisis we're facing. Those kinds of issues I think are at fundamental as we go forward and making sure we're doing that communication and that those services are available.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Albornoz, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief. Dr. Crowley, I really wanted to express my appreciation for you highlighting the developmental disability plan, and really thank you so much for supporting and endorsing the development of that plan. I think that's another example of community working collaboratively with the county holistically to address the needs, where we can only go so far, and the community's in a better position to understand those needs and finding that sweet spot to be able to enhance services and make them more comprehensive. And that is exactly the model we'll need to follow in other uniquely impacted communities, which as we've learned throughout this process, I think is really important moving forward. So thank you, Dr. Crowell, for your leadership on that and so many other things. Really wanted to express my appreciation.
Thank you very much. And thank you all, Dr. Crowell, and I guess Dr. Gales is already gone, but Dr. Crowell and Dr. Stoddard for being with us today. We're going to go on recess to my council colleagues and to the public. We will be back at 1:30, where we will have 7 public hearings and then a continuation of many other interesting topics as we go through the day. So please come back at 1:30 for our public hearings. Thank you very much. We are now officially on recess.